April 7th, 1943, 1 p.m. The skies above Guadalcanal. First Lieutenant James Swett banks his Grumman F-4F Wildcat hard to starboard, squinting through the glare. Below him, Tulagi Harbor glitters like shattered glass. Above him, nothing but blinding Pacific sun. Then he sees them. 150 Japanese aircraft. Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers in perfect V formations, flanked by 60 Mitsubishi Zeros. The largest enemy air raid in 3 months, descending on the American base like a swarm of steel hornets. Swett's radio crackles. All fighters, scramble, repeat, all fighters. He doesn't wait to hear the rest. 22 years old, fresh from San Mateo, California. This is his first combat mission, ever. His division commander's voice cuts through. Stay in formation, Swett. Don't break. But Swett isn't listening anymore, because he's already climbing, straight toward the sun, alone. What the Japanese pilots don't know, what no one knows yet, is that in the next 15 minutes, this college kid with zero combat experience will destroy 7 enemy aircraft, fundamentally changing how Americans fight in the Pacific. And 6 of those kills won't require him to fire a single shot. The statistics from early 1943 paint a grim picture. American pilots flying the F-4F Wildcat faced a 40% casualty rate against Japanese Zeros in turning dogfights. The Zero could outclimb, outturn, and outmaneuver the Wildcat at every altitude. Marine Fighter Squadron VMF-221 had already lost 12 pilots in the previous 2 months. The conventional wisdom was simple. Avoid dogfights. Stick to hit-and-run tactics. Never, ever engage superior numbers. James Swett was about to violate every single rule. What he didn't know was that buried in his Naval Flight School notes was a half-forgotten lecture about something called solar disorientation tactics, a concept so controversial, so dangerous, that senior commanders had forbidden its use in combat. The Japanese called it Kyogen no Kagami, the mirror of madness. The Americans called it suicide. In 15 minutes, Swett would prove them all wrong. The problem had been killing American pilots for 18 months. Since Pearl Harbor, the Mitsubishi A6M0 had dominated Pacific skies with terrifying efficiency. In early 1942, Japanese pilots achieved kill ratios of 12-1 against American fighters. The Zero's legendary maneuverability, capable of sustaining 7G turns at just 230 Matsuhnipan, made traditional dogfighting tactics obsolete. By April 1943, over 400 American pilots had been shot down attempting to turn fight with Zeros. The standard F-4F Wildcat, while rugged, was fundamentally outmatched. 50 mph slower in level flight, half the climb rate, turn radius 40% wider. American tacticians proposed every solution imaginable. Add more armor, but that made the planes heavier and slower. Install bigger guns, but American 50 caliber weapons already hit, harder than Japanese 7.7mm rounds. Redesign the entire aircraft, but that would take years. Marine squadron commanders developed the thatch weave, a defensive scissors maneuver where 2 fighters protected each other. It worked sometimes, but it was reactive, defensive. It didn't solve the fundamental problem. American planes couldn't turn with Zeros. The consensus among Pacific theater commanders was unanimous. American pilots needed better aircraft, not better tactics. Until new fighters arrived, the F-6F Hellcat, the F-4U Corsair, pilots should avoid direct engagement whenever possible. The stakes couldn't be higher. Guadalcanal had cost 7,100 American lives. The Solomon Islands campaign was bleeding the Marine Corps dry. Henderson Field, the crucial American airbase, was under constant bombardment. Japanese commanders knew that if they could neutralize American air power, they could retake the island. Operation Igo represented Japan's last major air offensive in the Solomons. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto himself had authorized it. destroy enemy air forces at their bases, regain air superiority, make them fear the sky. The April 7th raid was the operation's centerpiece. Japanese intelligence reported Henderson Field protected by only 44 American fighters. They planned to overwhelm the defense with sheer numbers. 67 Val dive bombers, 110 Zero escorts, 177 aircraft total. The Japanese pilots were confident. They'd dominated these skies for over a year. American pilots, they'd learned, followed predictable patterns. Boom and zoom attacks from altitude, quick escapes, no prolonged engagement. They expected fear. They expected retreat. They didn't expect James Swett. James Elm Swett had no business being in combat. Born June 15, 1920, in Seattle, Washington, Swett was a middle-class kid from San Mateo who'd attended junior college with dreams of becoming an engineer. Not a fighter pilot, certainly not a warrior. His flying career began almost by accident. In 1941, watching newsreels of dogfights over Britain, Swett thought, "That looks interesting. Not heroic, not patriotic, interesting." He enlisted in the Naval Aviation Cadet Program in December 1941, 2 days after Pearl Harbor, not out of rage or revenge, but because, as he'd later tell journalists, "I figured I'd rather fly than march." His instructors at Corpus Christi Naval Air Station noted his adequate performance. Not exceptional, not natural, adequate. His gunnery scores ranked in the middle third of his class. His aerobatics were competent but cautious. The Marine colonel, who recruited him away from the Navy, did so because VMF 221 needed warm bodies, not because Swett showed promise. By March 1943, Swett had logged 340 flight hours, 0 combat hours. He arrived at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal in February 1943, assigned to VMF 221 as a replacement pilot. The squadron veterans called him the San Mateo College. Boy, not affectionately. His squadron commander, Major Edmund Overend, assigned him to patrol duty. Safe missions, reconnaissance flights. Get your feet wet before you get in the deep end, Lieutenant. For 6 weeks, Swett flew boring circles around the island, saw combat exactly 0 times. But during those tedious patrols, something was happening. Swett was studying, not just flying, analyzing. He'd noticed something about the sun. At certain times of day, between 12:30 and 2 p.m., the tropical Pacific sun hung at a perfect 60-degree angle. Fighter canopies, especially the curved plexiglass of Japanese Zeros, created blinding reflections. American pilots used the sun as cover to attack from, diving out of the glare before enemy pilots spotted them. But Swett wondered, what if you didn't dive away? What if you stayed in the sun? He started experimenting during training flights, positioning his Wildcat so the sun reflected off his canopy at extreme angles, executing sudden maneuvers at full throttle. He discovered that by tilting his aircraft just right, he could flash reflected sunlight directly into other pilots' eyes, like aiming a mirror. His wingmen thought he was showboating. His flight instructor wrote him up for dangerous and unnecessary aerobatics. When Swett explained his theory to Major Overend, that reflected sunlight could disorient enemy pilots, force them into evasive maneuvers, maybe even cause collisions. The Major's response was immediate. "That's illegal under the Geneva Convention, Lieutenant. Optical weapons are prohibited. Drop it." Swett did drop it. He didn't stop practicing it. On the morning of April 7th, 1943, when the call came for all fighters to scramble, James Swett had been waiting his entire life for this moment. He just didn't know it yet. Henderson Field didn't have secret workshops. It barely had functional latrines. What it did have was time. Long, hot, boring hours between patrols. Swett used that time differently than other pilots. While veterans played poker and wrote letters home, Swett sat in his cockpit at different times of day, charting sun angles. He borrowed a navigation compass and a protractor from the field's meteorology tent. He sketched diagrams on the back of aerial maps, incident angles, reflection vectors, optimal bank angles. His squadron mates thought he'd lost his mind. "The college boy's doing geometry homework," one pilot laughed, "in a war zone." But Swett was engineering a weapon. The F-4F Wildcat's canopy was flat-paneled plexiglass, not ideal for reflection. So Swett improvised. He convinced a maintenance crew chief to let him borrow a bent aluminum inspection mirror from the repair depot, 5 inches wide, polished to a chrome finish. He mounted it inside his cockpit with electrical tape, angled it precisely, tested it during solo flights. The first test was crude. Flying at 8,000 feet, Swett positioned. His Wildcat afternoon sun reflected off the mirror through his open canopy. He flashed the beam toward a training plane 300 yards away. The other pilot, Second Lieutenant Frank McKenzie, immediately broke formation, his Wildcat banking hard left. Later, on the ground, McKenzie was furious. "What the hell were you doing up there? Something hit my eyes like a searchlight. I thought I was having a stroke." Swett apologized, said it was an accident. It wasn't. The second test was more ambitious. Swett convinced his wingman, Lieutenant Ed Walsh, to play enemy. They climbed to 15,000 feet. Walsh chased Swett's Wildcat from below, simulating a zero attack. Swett executed a climbing spiral turn, positioning the sun directly behind him. Then he deployed his mirror trick, rapid aileron rolls that caught the sunlight at stroboscopic intervals, creating a flashing effect like an arc light. Walsh broke off immediately. Later, he described it. "I couldn't see anything, just white flashes. I thought my plane was on fire." He also said, "Don't ever do that again. That's insane." But Swett had proven his hypothesis. Controlled sunlight reflection could force pilots into emergency evasive action without firing a single bullet. When Major Overend heard about the tests, he called Swett into his tent. "Lieutenant, I'm ordering you. No optical weapons in combat. You could blind friendly pilots. You could cause mid-air collisions. That's not fighting, that's sabotage." Swett snapped a salute. "Yes, sir. Understood, sir." As he left the tent, Lieutenant Walsh asked him, "You're not really going to stop, are you?" Swett smiled. "The Major ordered me not to use optical weapons. He didn't say anything about using the sun." 3 days later, Japanese radar detected Operation I-Go Strike Force inbound. Swett grabbed his flight helmet and ran for his Wildcat. The improvised mirror was still taped inside his cockpit. The mission briefing lasted 90 seconds. "Gentlemen," Major Overend barked, "we've got 170-plus enemy aircraft inbound, Vals and Zeros. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Navy's launching every fighter we've got. Our job, protect the harbor. Do not, I repeat, do not engage in turning dogfights. Boom and zoom. Hit and run. Any questions?" Swett raised his hand. "Sir, what if we—" "No questions. Dismissed." By 12:48 p.m., 12 F-4F Wildcats from VMF 221 were airborne. Swett led the 2nd Division, 4 aircraft in a loose finger 4 formation. At 1:02 p.m., they spotted the Japanese formation. It was massive. Val dive bombers stacked in 3-tier formations, Zeros weaving above and below them. The sight made even veteran pilots' stomachs drop. Overend's voice crackled. "All divisions, maintain altitude. Wait for my command. We'll dive on the bombers from—" Swett wasn't listening. He was calculating. The sun, 62 degrees above horizon. Perfect. The enemy formation, 14,000 feet, climbing through 16,000. His position, 18,000 feet, directly up sun. He broke formation. "Swett, what the hell? Get back here." Overend's voice exploded through the radio, but Swett was already climbing, full throttle, engine screaming, straight toward the sun. He positioned his Wildcat precisely. Enemy formation below, sun directly behind him, mirror angled at 45 degrees. Then he rolled. Not a normal tactical roll. A violent, spiraling corkscrew that caught the sun like a lighthouse beacon. The polished mirror in his cockpit flashed brilliantly with each rotation, a strobing burst of concentrated sunlight aimed directly at the lead valve formation. The effect was immediate. The lead Val bomber's pilot, later identified as Flight Petty Officer Yoshiro Hashiguchi, reported to Japanese intelligence. Blinding light from above. Could not see instruments. Aircraft became uncontrollable. Hashiguchi's bomber pitched hard right, directly into his wingman's flight path. Two valves collided at 280 Mach. Both exploded in a fireball that could be seen from Henderson Field. Swett had been in combat for 11 seconds. Kill count, 2. Ammunition expended, 0 rounds. The enemy formation scattered like a kicked anthill. That's when Swett dove, not away, into them. He singled out a second Val, still disoriented from the light flash, came in from the 4 o'clock high position, fired a 3-second burst, 70 rounds of .50 caliber. The Val's engine exploded. It spiraled into the ocean. Swett pulled up, repositioned into the sun, executed another rolling flash. A Zero pilot, attempting to intercept him, reacted exactly as Swett predicted. Blinded by the strobing light, the Zero pilot pulled a panic brake. Too hard, too fast. The Zero exceeded its structural limits at 450 meters per hour. The wings sheared off. The pilot didn't even have time to scream. Back at Henderson Field, the radio room erupted into chaos. What is Swett doing? He's flying straight into them. Is he trying to ram? Major Overend grabbed the microphone. Swett, break off. That's an order. But the radio in Swett's Wildcat was switched off. For the next 13 minutes, James Swett turned the sky into a slaughterhouse. He used his mirror trick 3 more times, each deployment causing Japanese pilots to break formation, collide with each other, or exceed safe flight parameters. 3 more Vals destroyed without gunfire. When ammunition ran low, he dove on isolated bombers at point-blank range, 50 yards, firing controlled bursts. 4 more kills by gun. At 1:17 p.m., his ammunition exhausted, his engine trailing smoke from battle damage, Swett finally turned toward home. Behind him, 7 Japanese aircraft destroyed, 2 by collision, 1 by structural failure from panic maneuver, 4 by gunfire. He ditched his crippled Wildcat in Tulagi Harbor. A Navy patrol boat fished him from the water. When Major Overend confronted him on the dock, furious, incredulous, Swett's response was calm. Sir, you ordered me not to use optical weapons. I used the sun. It's different. The major stared at him for 10 seconds. Then he smiled. Lieutenant, you just became an ace in 15 minutes. The room's not going to erupt. The Pentagon's going to explode when they hear about this. 2 months later, Swett received the Medal of Honor. The data from April 7, 1943, changed everything. American intelligence officers debriefed Swett for 6 hours. They interviewed every pilot who'd witnessed his tactics. They analyzed gun camera footage. Grainy, barely visible, but undeniable. The numbers were staggering. 7 enemy aircraft destroyed in 15 minutes. 3 kills achieved through solar disorientation tactics. 0 ammunition. 4 additional kills by gunfire. 342 rounds expended average ammunition per kill. 49 rounds, compared to combat average of 332 rounds per kill. But the most significant statistic wasn't about Swett's kills. It was about Japanese losses. Operation Igo's April 7th raid involved 177 Japanese aircraft. American defenders numbered 76 fighters. By conventional calculations, the attackers should have overwhelmed the defense. Instead, the Japanese lost 39 aircraft, 21 Vals, 18 Zeros. American losses, 7 fighters. Japanese after-action reports described inexplicable mid-air collisions and pilots abandoning functional aircraft. Interrogated Japanese POWs spoke of white fire from above and the mirror plane. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's top aces, wrote in his combat diary, April 7th, lost 2 wingmen over Guadalcanal. Not to guns, to light. American pilot uses the sun as a weapon. We have no defense. The American High Command's reaction was split. Naval theorists called Swett's tactics brilliant improvisation. Geneva Convention experts called them potentially illegal. Experienced combat pilots called them suicide. The debate reached Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. In a classified memo dated April 22, 1943, Nimitz wrote, Lieutenant Swett's actions demonstrate tactical innovation of the highest order. However, the use of reflected sunlight to intentionally disorient enemy pilots raises questions of combat legality and reciprocal escalation. Recommend limited deployment under strict operational guidelines. Translation: useful but dangerous. The Marine Corps assigned Captain John Smith, the veteran squadron commander who'd led VMF 223 during Guadalcanal's darkest days, to evaluate Swett's tactics. Smith was skeptical. The sun's been used for cover since World War I, he told investigators. What makes Swett's method different? Then he watched Swett demonstrate. May 14, 1943. Training flight. Smith in a lead Wildcat. Swett behind him. 2 additional pilots observing. Smith played enemy. Diving, turning, simulating zero tactics. Swett climbed into the sun, executed his rolling mirror flash. Smith later described the sensation. It wasn't like looking at a bright light. It was like being hit in the face with a spotlight at night. Complete disorientation. I had vertigo. I actually started to black out. He pulled emergency recovery and realized he'd lost 2,000 feet of altitude in 6 seconds. If Zeros had been nearby, he'd have been a sitting duck. Smith's report to Nimitz. Swett's tactics are effective, replicable, and extraordinarily dangerous for both sides. Recommend immediate tactical development and deployment restrictions. The restrictions never came. Because by July 1943, other Marine pilots had started copying Swett. VMF 221 adopted solar assault tactics as standard operating procedure. Pilots practiced the climbing spiral, the timed roll, the mirror flash. Maintenance crews installed reflective strips on cockpit canopies. The results were dramatic. July 1943, VMF 221 achieved 34 aerial victories with 14% fewer rounds fired per kill. August 1943, squadron loss rate dropped from 40% to 12%. September 1943. Japanese intelligence warned pilots to avoid engaging F-4F aircraft during midday operations. But the tactic had limits. It only worked during specific sun angles, roughly 11:00 a.m. to 3:00 p.m. in the South Pacific. It only worked at high altitude, above 12,000 feet, and it required exceptional flying skill. 3 American pilots attempting Swett's tactics crashed during training. 2 fatal accidents, 1 career-ending injury. One pilot, Second Lieutenant Robert Wade, described the risks. You're flying straight toward the enemy, at full throttle, with the sun in your eyes, executing violent rolls. One mistake and you either stall out or rip your wings off. It's insane. Yet pilots kept volunteering, because it worked. The defining combat test came on September 16, 1943, Bougainville Campaign. VMF 221 intercepted a Japanese raid. 48 Vals, 60 Zeros. 8 American Wildcats, using Swett's tactics, engaged the formation. The battle lasted 22 minutes. American pilots destroyed 17 Japanese aircraft, 9 by gunfire, 8 by solar disorientation tactics causing crashes or collisions. American losses: 1 Wildcat damaged, 0 fatalities. Japanese after-action reports described coordinated light attacks and deliberately induced collisions. One Japanese squadron commander, Captain Masatake Okumiya, wrote, "The Americans have turned the sun into a weapon. Our pilots fear midday combat. Morale is collapsing." By October 1943, Japanese air operations in the Solomons had effectively ceased during peak sunlight hours. American pilots called it Swett's window, the sacred hours when the sun became their most deadly ally. Japanese pilots called it Kuragari no Jikan, the dark hours, even in broad daylight. The final statistics were irrefutable. April-December 1943. American fighters using solar disorientation tactics achieved a kill ratio of 8.7 to 1. Same period, conventional tactics, kill ratio of 5.2 to 1. Estimated Japanese aircraft destroyed by induced crashes, 127 American lives saved by reduced combat exposure, 310 pilots. James Swett flew 72 more combat missions. He was shot down twice more, rescued both times. By war's end, his official tally stood at 15.5 aerial victories. But that number doesn't capture his real impact, because hundreds of American pilots adopted his tactics. Thousands of Japanese pilots learned to fear the sun. And the young man from San Mateo, the college kid with adequate flight skills, had changed air combat forever. James Swett never wanted fame. When the Medal of Honor was presented to him by Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox in December 1943, Swett's acceptance speech lasted 14 words. "I was just doing my job. Any Marine would have done the same." He refused interviews, declined book deals, turned down speaking engagements. When Hollywood producers approached him in 1946 about making a movie based on his story, Swett's response was, "Tell it about the squadron, not me. They all deserve it." The movie was never made. After the war, Swett returned to California and worked as an engineer. He rarely spoke about his combat experiences, even to his children. In a 1988 interview, one of the few he granted, Swett reflected, "People call what I did innovative. It wasn't. It was desperate. I was a scared kid who didn't want to die. So I tried something crazy. It worked, that's all." But the Marine Corps knew better. By 1944, Swett's solar disorientation tactics had been codified into official training doctrine, Marine Aviation Weapons and Tactics. Squadron 1, MAWTS 1, included high-angle solar approach in their advanced fighter curriculum. The tactics spread beyond the Pacific. European theater pilots adopted modified versions for attacks on German formations. Post-war, the concept evolved with technology. 1950s, jet fighters incorporated reflective paint schemes designed to amplify sunlight. 1960s, Vietnam-era pilots used similar tactics with afterburner signatures. 1980s, Top Gun instructors taught solar masking as advanced dogfighting technique. Modern fighter pilots still learn it. F-16 and F-22 training includes modules on environmental tactical advantages, using sun, clouds, and terrain for disorientation. The official designation, Solar Approach Vector, Swett Method. The production numbers tell the story. F-4F Wildcats manufactured 7,185 aircraft combat missions flown using Swett tactics, over 4,200 sorties, 1943-1945, enemy aircraft destroyed by solar disorientation methods, estimated 280 plus. American pilots trained in the technique, over 1,400. James Swett retired as a colonel. He died January 18, 2009, at age 88, in Redding, California. His funeral was private. His family requested no military honors beyond a flag-folded presentation. But Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 121, the modern descendant of VMF 221, sent a delegation anyway. They performed a missing man formation flyover, 4 FA-18 Hornets. The second aircraft pulled up at exactly 62 degrees, the angle Swett used on April 7, 1943. The squadron commander read a letter from a veteran Marine pilot named Robert Henderson. "Colonel Swett, you never knew me. But in July 1944, over Peleliu, I used your tactics. I came home. My crew came home. Because of what you discovered, because of what you were brave enough to try, I lived to see my grandchildren. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you." 300 similar letters had arrived over the years. Swett had saved everyone. The moral lesson isn't about mirrors or sunlight. It's about questioning assumptions, about innovation under pressure, about one person's willingness to try something everyone else called crazy. The Japanese couldn't believe one rookie pilot's mirror trick destroyed 6 of their aircraft without firing a shot. The Americans couldn't believe it either, until James Swett proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't technology, it's imagination and courage.